Welcome, everyone, to Why Wellness Programs Aren't Enough and What to Do About It. Looking forward to learning from Patricia and Katina today. This is a Culture First community event by the Culture First Book Club chapter. Patricia and Katina will share a little bit more about their backgrounds and the amazing work that they're doing. But they recently published a book, and so I'm super excited to basically do get the TLDR if you haven't read the book. And so, as a reminder, this is a community-led event, not a culture amp event, and some of our conversations can be sensitive, and we ask that we are all about creating an inclusive environment, and so we like to discuss bold topics with industry experts. We welcome your feedback, but do what you need to do to take care of yourself throughout however long we have together. If this is your first Culture First community event, welcome. My name is Jessie Jacob. I run our Culture First global community. And there's now over 100 global chapters with 19,000 community members just in this chapters community alone. And so, who are we? We're a group of people around the world united in the shared belief that a better world of work is possible. And by golly, we're willing to do something about it. This is a community supported by Culture Amp, who's on a mission to create a better world of work. And this is our much bigger mission, the bigger why of what we do in the world. So, we ask that you embody these 5 core principles while we're here together. So we ask that you foster belonging and acceptance. Just let people feel seen, valued, and appreciated for showing up and being themselves. We ask that you have the willingness to reflect and grow. If we're on this mission to transform the future of work, we hope that that goes back to our organizations doing the work, but ultimately that starts with us being the change we want to see in the world. We ask that you have the courage to be vulnerable. That looks different for all of us, so playing with whatever edge of vulnerability that is for you. We ask that you put learning into action. This idea of like, don't just let this information be consumed in one ear and out the other. Like, think about how this content can be embodied into the way that you live or to the way that you work so that we can see the ripple effect of this kind of gathering. And lastly, connection inside, business outside, which is just a weird way of saying that we ask that you connect in on the inside first as human beings. And if that leads to you all doing business later, that's cool. But in the context of this gathering, we're here to do the work together and actually form genuine connection, a relationship with one another. So if I can get like a little thumbs up, you all can agree to these in principles while we're together. Awesome. Okay, a little check-in prompt here that I wanted to. Oh, I had the same deck from our severance conversation the other day, which was a hoot. Okay, so wanting to understand, what are you hoping to get out of today's session? Why isn't this presenting? Hold up. You can do it, computer. I believe in you. There we go. Okay, what are you hoping to get out of today's session? This will be obviously anonymous. I'm not sure why the questions aren't loading below. Are you all able to type anything in when this opens up?
Yeah,
Yeah.
it just has a box where it says to type in your answer.
Yeah, yes. Okay, perfect. Yeah. So what are you hoping to get out of today's session? Drop in the box. It'll be again anonymous, but just curious what everyone's um here for. I'll put mine in here as well. There we go. Don't have a wellness program yet. Okay, awesome. Then this is going to be a perfect place to learn.
I hope we can live up to being incredibly wise. Very fun.
Connect with like-minded individuals passionate about workplace wellness, gaining some tactical takeaways for leaders. Cool. Awesome. I know one more person. How to get employees to understand that HR really does care about well-being. It's not just lip service. Ooh, I love that. That's a great one. Okay, and then uh, last question here, kind of a how would you define workplace wellness? We were gonna put all of the above, but if you had to put it into one bucket, which one would it be? Physical health, mental health, emotional health, work-life balance.
Mm.
Oh, fascinating. I think that goes
Interesting.
well. Yeah. Okay.
It is hard
Awesome.
to choose just one. I get that.
Yeah.
I know,
It's
right?
kind of a trick question, Sarah. So we'll talk about that in a little bit.
Oh my gosh, awesome. Well, I'm gonna hand it over to our speakers and authors today. Patricia, Katina, thank you both so much for collaborating with us. I'm excited to sit back and learn from you both, but over to you both.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you so much. Yeah, super excited to be here. We are going to share some content, some high-level overviews of what our book is about and our findings. Um, and we're always open to questions or anything that you want to talk about. Like, please drop it in the chat. Happy to pivot and answer any questions or kind of dig into things further or deeper. I do love that people are interested in action. I love that folks really want to make changes and kind of understand like what leaders can do, which is exactly what we were aiming to do with our book. In our book, if you haven't had a chance to take a look at it, we actually have worksheets at the end of each of our chapters because we're so focused on action. But to back up, let me introduce myself and Katina. So I'm Patricia Grabarek. My co-author and co-founder of Worker Being is Katina Sawyer. We met back in graduate school at Penn State. We both have our doctorates in industrial organizational psychology, and we studied workplace wellness throughout graduate school. And Katina went down the academic path, so she's still doing all sorts of great research. I went into practice, so I've been working in consulting on people teams and HR teams. Kind of putting all of this to life. And we came together to create Worker Being because we saw a gap between what was working in the research for around workplace wellness and how people were actually addressing it in work environments. We saw that, and we still continue to see, as Gallup has pointed out many times, and all this different research is pointing out, there's a lot of money being spent on workplace wellness, but employees are more burnt out than ever, and we want to help fix that. Katina, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, I think the only other thing that I'll say is that the book was really born from uh, hearing from clients and students alike that they were struggling to solve some problems that we knew that there were some really basic and important research done on, but a lot of the science on workplace wellness stays behind a paywall, and academic articles are very hard to interpret. We needed to get years of training just to be able to read them and to do the research that goes behind them. And so we started with a blog, which we still have hosted on Psychology Today. New blog posts come out every month. And then we also have a podcast, which, when we started the blog, people were like, well, a lot of people like to listen to the content. So we started a podcast. And from the podcast, we started doing speaking and workshops. And what we started to notice, one of the main questions that we were getting from folks is like, okay, this is all great research. This is all great stuff. We understand what the research says, but there are so many things. There's so many tips in the wellness space. Mindfulness works, yoga works, like this works, that works. It's overwhelming. Tell me what to do, like boil it down, give me a roadmap. And we got that question enough that we thought, well, let's try to see if researchers have already done this. And the reality was that they had not. And so we thought, well, we have the skills and the toolkit to make that happen. So why don't we embark on it ourselves? And so what we're going to be presenting today is sort of the answer to that pressing question that a lot of people were asking us that now, we're able to kind of put out into the world.
And it's important to note that we focus on leaders because of that exact question. People wanted to know, what do I do? What does an organization do? And as we started digging into it and asking people questions about it, we learned that people are not interested in programs and workplace initiatives the way that, we traditionally think about workplace wellness. What really impacts their well-being the most is their leaders. It's the day-to-day experiences they have on their teams and with their leaders, and not the programs themselves. Because if you think about it, programs are only great if you have time to actually use them. Most people are struggling with overwork or, toxic environments, and you don't feel like you can actually take advantage of the programs that are being provided. So leaders are at the crux of creating a really healthy environment, and the programs are just a nice little added bonus if they exist in the organization. So because we heard this message over and over and over again, that leaders were really that main point of positive or negative experiences at work, that led us down to conduct a study. We did 2 studies, replicated them to really delve into this framework. But the first thing that we dove into is actually defining workplace wellness, which you all answered questions around.
Yeah. So when we asked people about what they meant by wellness, this seemed to be a really core disconnect between what employers understand as wellness and what employees are saying when they say they want wellness. And a lot of the academic research, they use the word wellness and well-being, but there's not a lot of consensus on definitions. And that's true also in the working world. Like, people can say that they want their employer to support their health and wellness, and the interpretation of what that means can depend on who's sitting in what seat and spending those dollars. And oftentimes people think that what they would find interesting is what other people would find interesting or what they would need. So we have some biases towards the things that we think would help our wellness without a recognition that this is likely to vary across individuals. So in our research, we asked people, what do you think it is that workplace wellness is defined as? And we heard a lot of different things, which you're going to see in a second, but really they all stem back to this idea that it's about the whole person. It's not any one thing. There's a lot of different facets of workplace wellness, and that different people prioritize different parts of those facets depending upon what they need and what their preferences are. So we heard a lot, and this quote kind of sums it up nicely, but across all of our participants, we heard these over and over again. Some people only mentioned one of them, some mentioned multiple, some mentioned all. This quote was a nice one to show because they really hit on all of the main themes. But this idea of mental health, do people feel like their mental well-being is supported? And that can be with regard to, psychological struggles or issues, as well as, feeling like they have a good, positive, and non-stressful work environment to work in. Physical health, which is, a lot of things that we think about when we think of wellness. Do you have time to get your exercise in, or is there a step challenge at work, or things like that? But also, do I have time to go to the doctor and care for myself if I'm sick, or if I'm managing something chronic, right? That also goes in the physical bucket. Emotions was really a lot about being able to be a whole emotional person. Often workplaces have a culture of more toxic positivity, like, you can say things are going great and have joyous emotions, but when things get tough, you're unable to surface those and have tough conversations. This was really about feeling like you could be in tune with the emotions that you were feeling as a human being, and that you were able to bring those into the workplace. And the last was really about balance, the sustained state of balance. Do you have a full work life and a full life outside of work? And can those two things fit together more harmoniously than not? It's never going to be perfect, but do you feel like they're fitting together better than they might in another circumstance?
So when we asked you how to define workplace wellness, it was a bit of a trick question, right? You have to pick maybe the one that was the most important to you, but everyone's going to have their own rankings of those different components. But ultimately, when it comes down to it, it's about the whole person and what really matters to you as an individual. It's a very individualized answer, but it kind of encompasses all those different components. One more setting the stage piece we want to talk about is, when we were doing our research, we were talking to a lot of people that had self-selected and said, hey, I have a leader that is really good at this, that has helped support my well-being. And as we had these conversations with them and asking them questions to really understand what is it these leaders are doing and what are they doing effectively, people also wanted to share the bad stories, right? They would tell us these great stories about these amazing leaders that we call generators, that are able to create strong connections, support work-life balance. They're doing all the things that we would want them to do. But then they're like, I have to tell you this comparison point, right? Who did not do this well in my life? What are the situations that I've been in where leaders are really doing a bad job at this? And, we were so focused on the positive that we hadn't really thought about the negative, but that contrast is so important in how people define the right behaviors, because they've seen what doesn't work well, which also helped inform our framework. So we learned a lot of stories about leaders that, maybe are extinguishers, not because they mean to be, it might be well-intentioned, but they don't know those right behaviors. They create toxicity in their environment unintentionally. They create stressful environments. They're workaholics and make everybody around them workaholics, right? So these folks drain employees' energy and are kind of the opposite of what we would like to see be effective at work. But it's important to note that those really strong behaviors of generators aren't necessarily just of the flip of what an extinguisher does, right? Because we were able to see these nuances and these details, we're able to really dig in further and understand like what it makes a generator unique, but also what makes somebody an extinguisher that might not just be the opposite of a generator, right? So we could dive into those pieces more in detail, which helped build our framework out to really solidify the key things that those generators need to do.
So now we're going to talk a little bit about what steps leaders should take to become more like generators. In the book, we get much more into extinguisher and extinguisher behaviors and what to avoid. And as Patricia was mentioning, it's not just that generators go from, neutral to great and extinguishers go from neutral to bad, and they're two ends of a pole. There's unique behaviors that great leaders do and unique behaviors that uniquely not great leaders do. But today we're going to focus on that sort of positive deviance on the continuum going in the direction towards what you can do today to make yourself a much better or a great leader. And so the steps that you can take are really important because, that was really the crux of what we wanted to figure out from our research, not giving people a bunch of research-based tips that say, well, this predicts that and that predicts that, but really, how do we boil down on what you should do action step by action step to give people a clear roadmap so they feel empowered to actually become a generator, as opposed to getting excited about the concept of being a generator and then that energy fizzles out because they don't know what to do with it, right? So this next section is really about how do you put into practice some of the things that we learned.
And on that note, we've already talked about wellness programs a little bit. Workplace wellness isn't defined by programs. So the first thing that we think about when it comes to creating an effective environment is and if you don't have all of the millions of dollars and huge budget to put towards this, don't spend money on the programs, right? That's not where you're going to get the biggest bang for your buck. As we've talked about already, there's so much money being spent on workplace wellness programs, and yet employees are struggling more than ever. So we would recommend taking a step back from those programs and really focusing on the behaviors of leaders, because that's where you're going to see the improvement that you need. An employee doesn't need a gym membership, right? That's not going to make them so happy physically. That's not going to make sure that they're healthy. What's going to make sure they're healthy is that they have the time to take care of their physical health the way that they want to or need to, right? Maybe they aren't gym goers. Maybe they like to take walks. Maybe, there's so many different things that people can do for their physical health, go to the doctor, what have you. But what's more important is that time, for example. So the wellness programs are not the key focus of what organizations and what leaders should be focusing on.
And that's a bit of a hot take, right? Like, because what we're kind of saying is that if employees are coming to you and saying, I'm stressed, I'm overworked, et cetera, it's not the best thing to be like, well, I have something for you. You could do yoga at lunch after having 4 hours of an extremely stressful job. And then you can blow off some steam there and then come back to your extremely stressful job. And that should fix everything. The idea is that how about we just take the temperature down on the job that people are doing on a daily basis instead of offering them these Band-Aid solutions, right? So we're not saying that those are bad to do in general. It's just that they're not going to solve for a deeper root problem that you're having. And so what does solve for the deeper root problem? Well, we kind of found these 4 main buckets of things that leaders do, generator leaders do, to help create more thriving teams. And the first thing that we uncovered, and there are many more details in the book about the behaviors and different subdimensions of this main bucket of behaviors. So we have a couple of chapters on this bucket in the book. But the first is that no one wants a superhero leader. And something that we heard time and again was that generator leaders kind of throw out the stereotypes and expectations that have sort of stuck around and become sticky for what a leader looks like and how a leader acts. And this idea of throwing out these stereotypes of leaders and, kind of what we think of as the ideal leader traditionally will come up across different pieces of our book and our framework because, what these generators did really well was recognize that people want a human being and people are human beings, right? And so letting go of this idea that leaders have to be these like robotic, stoic people who always have the answers, who don't have flaws, who have it under control, who are calm, cool, and collected when everybody else is freaking out. That's not actually accurate for what a leader needs to be or how a leader needs to act. What people wanted from their leaders was a lot more authenticity and vulnerability, recognition that they do have things happening outside of work in their lives that people can learn about and know about. And also the idea that, you know, these leaders have struggles. They have flaws and weaknesses. This idea that leaders need to always have it all together and have the answer and know what to do, and they're not worried about their own performance, or they're never worried about the team or how the team's going to fare. All of that people can see through. And so when your team can see through what you're saying, because they know you're not a robot, even if you're acting like a robot, they start to distrust other things about you. So if I think this person is showing up inauthentically at work and they're not showing me their true selves, well, what else are they not telling me? Or how can I predict what they're going to do or what they're going to say or what they're actually thinking about me if I can't trust the things that are coming out of their mouth to be authentic? So what people really wanted was an authentic and vulnerable leader that shared their struggles and their humanity. The last thing that was really important about that was that we heard from a lot of folks that leaders who acted like superheroes made them not want to be leaders themselves, because they were like, well, I'm not a superhero. I don't want to sacrifice all these things. I want to have a life outside of work. I want to be a full person. My leader's not showing me that. So that sends me the message that if I want to be a leader, I can't be that. And so it was discouraging to people to take on leadership roles themselves when their leaders were displaying leadership in a way that didn't feel authentic to them and who they were as people.
The second set of behaviors is all about the tone and not the time. So what we mean by that is these really good generators, they are the ones that are creating an environment that has the right tone, the right vibes, if you will, the feeling that really helps people be effective and collaborative and feeling their best. But they're not spending an exorbitant amount of time on that. They understand that spending tons and tons of time trying to build a culture is not effective. What's actually effective is role modeling the right behavior and showing people what that is. And then those behaviors start to catch on. So as Katina was just mentioning, right, if people are looking at their leader and they're like, I can't be that, that's nothing that's attainable or achievable to me, then they're not going to even attempt it. But if you're role modeling positive behaviors that people are interested in trying or wanting to be a part of, they're going to do that and they're going to continue to do it. And it's going to create this cycle where they're all doing the right thing, even when you're not there as a leader. So the types of behaviors that these leaders were role modeling is work-life balance. They were always open about the things that they do. So the fun things they do on weekends, or the kids' soccer game at the end of the workday, or, you know, their favorite breakfast time with their family before they come into work, or whatever that looks like, right? They talk about the things that they care about in their life. So people see that it's possible to be in this type of a role and have that life, and also to make them feel like they can actually do it too, right? It's totally okay for them to have that work-life balance as well because their leader's doing it. But they also role modeled things like positivity, helping behaviors, and gratitude. And the reason why those three are so important is because they're all contagious. If a leader is being really positive and showing up with, encouragement and kindness, people are going to do the same. If they're helping others, if they're helping their colleagues, if they're helping their team members when they're struggling on something or they need to step away and they pick up the slack for that person, other team members are going to see that that's valued and they're going to do the same. And then when it comes to gratitude, similar thing. Gratitude is contagious. If your leader is thanking people in front of a group, for the things that they've done, not only are they showing what they care about, right? So if, like, let's say you helped a colleague and you were thanked for that, that's a signal that the leader cares about the fact that you would help somebody else. But also that feeling of gratitude, you then want to spread it. People like to spread gratitude, and that continues to create this ripple effect. So as you do these behaviors as a leader, your employees notice, they pay attention, and what they are going to do is follow your lead and continue building that culture without you having to be there all the time to make sure the right behaviors are being done.
The third component that we heard really strongly from our participants, both in our interviews and in our survey data, was that these leaders recognized that life is important and should be preserved, and work can be placed around life as opposed to defaulting always to vice versa. So traditionally, people have thought of, and leaders have thought of, and organizations have thought of your work commitments as being the things that are immovable on your calendar, and your life commitments have to slide on between them, right? And that means that at any time, if on a whim someone changes a meeting and you had a life commitment, you're expected to move that life commitment to make room for the work commitment, right? These leaders recognized that what was important to their employees outside of work needed to be treated as sacred. And so they helped employees to place those things on their calendars. And not only were they respectful of making sure that they allowed employees to have time for those things, but they also made sure that other employees were respectful of that time. So they actually helped the team to understand what were the commitments that were important to each other on the team. And then they created an environment where people were very respectful of each other's boundaries. We call this being a boundary bouncer when we were thinking about what to term this in the data. And as we were reading through what participants were sharing in their stories, we thought of an image of a bouncer at a club. You're standing there, you've got the VIP rope, and people are asking to come in. And these generator leaders were really that scary bouncer that were like, only if you're extremely important can you come past this rope, because this rope is actually meaningful, right? It's not just to let anybody in. And so these leaders helped employees to boundary bounce and empowered them to bounce their own boundaries as well. So for example, we heard a story where somebody had a commitment where every Tuesday and Thursday they were coaching a kids soccer team and they had to leave at 3:45. And previously they had a leader who constantly was blocking things into that time. Like, oh, I know that you said you have to go at 3:45, but maybe just at 4, or, maybe you could talk to me on the car while you're on the way. Right. So it always felt like they were like on right until they got to that point. They didn't have time to decompress. They couldn't be fully present. So their leader was letting them do it, but they weren't actually being respectful of the boundary. Whereas this generator leader that they talked about was very clear. Okay, this person has to leave on Tuesdays and Thursdays at 3:45, didn't put stuff on the calendar then. And if they saw that somebody else had put something on the calendar, they would ask, like, are you cool with that? Or do you want me to tell this person to take a hike? So they were very good about helping them set and keep their boundaries. So this idea that life can actually take priority over work and work can be squeezed in between life was a flipped mindset that generator leaders tended to have.
And I see Sarah, you had a great question about action steps on how to do this in the organization. It is hard, and it's hard for people to buy into this. We'll talk about some challenges in a bit, which I think might get to some of it. But one thing I do want to call out is there is a possibility to create a microculture on your team. So sometimes you'll be in an organization where there's a lot of bad things around you, or boundary breakers running around. Maybe you can't fight off every single thing, but you can try to create a culture on your team that helps you keep each other's boundaries, support each other. If there's somebody pushing on one boundary, maybe somebody else can step in because it's not interfering with their boundary, right? How can we do this together? So there are some tips and tricks that we do have in the book about some of this, as well as I mentioned, we really focus on worksheets and things to try to get people to actually take some actions. But let's have that discussion further if you want, after we kind of get through the next few slides. Okay, so the next set of behaviors were all about the fact that one size does not fit all. We talked about already how work-life balance and workplace wellness and how everyone defines these things is different and unique, right? The boundaries you have are not going to be the same boundaries as mine or Katina's. Everyone's going to have things that are important to them, and it's going to vary, by who you are, what your life is like, right? It changes over time. So you might start your career in your 20s, you don't have a spouse or a partner or kids or anything like that. Eventually you may have that, you may not, but you might be in that situation. And now what matters differs on what it looked like when you were 22, right? What matters when you're 50 might be different than when you're 30. So it's going to not only change from person to person, but it also changes across your own lifetime. So being very clear on your own perspective and needs is so important. And then what leaders do that is great, these generators, they come in and they understand that it's not going to be one size fits all. They understand that the way they do things or what they needed when they were 25 is not the same as what somebody else may want or need or care about. And what they do instead of figuring out solutions based on their own perspectives, they really focus in on the person. So we have some tools around person-centered planning. And really what that means is this leaders will sit there, they've built that trust by being authentic, right? They've already role modeled great behaviors, they've been bouncing boundaries left and right. Now, if you come to them with a challenge or a need, they will sit down with you. They will have a conversation. They will understand what you're actually looking for, what solutions you might have or ideas you might have, and work through it together. So they don't know the right answer to everything, and they admit that. They are very clear in understanding that they don't have every solution, and they know that you may know better. You probably know better about what matters to you, and maybe they'll have some ideas and some adjustments and tweaks that you can work through together, but they really spend that time focusing on the individual and getting to know people and helping them work through challenges or create new boundaries if needed based on new circumstances because they understand that person and they really take that person's needs into account.
So we mentioned challenges and things that you might run across that would be difficult if you're trying to become a generator. And that question from Sarah was very apropos because we definitely came across some of these questions as we were doing our research and also presenting as we've been presenting this content to different audiences. And so one of the things that I want to just say right out of the gate is that generator leaders make workplaces better, but they can't make workplaces perfect. And it seemed to us very strongly across our interviews that people really appreciated working for leaders who they knew were working to do the best they could to make the environment as thriving as possible. And they gave them some grace when they weren't able to make that perfect, right? And so nobody's going to be able to make it perfect, but it seems like what people wanted were leaders that made it better, right? And it wasn't that they were 100% every time or on it every time, but that working in this environment was better than working in environments that they had been in previously. And so, you know, as we were just discussing, when it comes to cultures of overwork and you feel like you're like punching up on these, you know, broader norms outside of you, there are some things that you can do to try to shift those norms, focusing on the vital few, the priorities that the leaders in your organization really, really care about, and trying to speak in their language to show how your team is delivering on those things. Metrics are also important. How do you capture data that's showing the impact of the leadership that you are showing? Maybe your team is thriving and performing. Our data suggests that that's the case better than other teams. How do you document what you're doing and why that's the case to try to make an exemplar out of your team in the way that you're doing things in a language that people are going to care about and understand that's results focused, right? You can also find champions. While, you know, many senior leaders may be not as attuned with these sorts of conversations, there may be some who are like-minded, right? If you know of people who are on board with this or people whose leadership you admire who are senior to you, go talk to them. Tell them that you admire what they're doing. You'd like to replicate some of their behaviors and you wish other people led more like them. Finding champions and trying to get them on board with the idea that you can reproduce some of these behaviors on a broader scale is important. And of course, as Patricia put, you may not be able to shift the entire organization depending upon where you're at, but finding those champions at a higher level could help create some of that greater influence. Naysayers are also an issue. So let's say you're trying to do this on your team and you have a curmudgeon that feels like this is too fluffy or too much, or they just want to be very transactional about things. Building camaraderie between your team members can help create a norm where that person feels more a part of the fabric of the team. And as they get involved and enveloped in that team, they may find some of these norms more positive than norms that they had before. It might just take a little bit of experience and convincing to be part of that fabric. So as much as you can building a strong team culture, you might also be able to provide some training to this person to help them to reverse some of their maybe more negative behaviors. And we like to really think about glimmers of promise with naysayers. So we often like to think of people as like, they're 100% generator or 100% extinguisher and there's no in between. But reality is this is a little bit messy. And so if you see somebody who's acting like an extinguisher 60% of the time, but 40% of the time they're doing generator behaviors, capitalize on that, right? Talk to them about those 40% of behaviors. Wow, it's really great when you do those things. I wish you would do that more. Or that was really fantastic when you did that. Do that again, right? So capitalizing on these glimmers of promise can help shift and move the needle on people who might start lopsided on one end and you could move them more towards the middle or towards a more positive direction. You also can't please everyone. And we talked about this in terms of banking goodwill. So let's say half of your team wants to work fully remote and the other half wants to work fully in person. There's not really a way that a leader can make everyone happy in that situation, right? And so how do you do that? Well, you may come to a conclusion, a decision that makes the most business sense or makes the most sense for the majority of the team or the culture you're trying to build. But what these leaders did really well was that they were transparent. They communicated their intentions. I'm trying to do the right thing for the team. I want to create this kind of culture, or I want to honor everybody's preferences, but here's the struggle that I'm running into. Help me figure out a solution. Or here's the solution I've come up with, but here's why. We have a really interesting story in the book about a person who had two leaders, one who she considered an extinguisher and one who she considered a generator. She wanted to relocate across the country, and the extinguisher leader told her no, that she couldn't relocate, but didn't give her a reason why, and basically just said, well, we just don't do that here. And so there was no real indication that she even tried to ask. It was a very knee-jerk reaction that she can't do it. Her generator leader had the same answer. They were not able to relocate her, but she explained why. She said she would keep it on her radar to see if there would be an opportunity in the future to move her. And she also gave her a more flexible work schedule so that she'd be able to get back to the West Coast where she was from more frequently. So, that the answer's the same. She couldn't relocate in either situation, but one extinguisher, one generator, the generator told her why and really made her a part of that problem solving process. And then the last thing is recovery. When all else fails, you have some control and ability and autonomy to figure out what you're going to do at the end of the workday to replenish your own health and well-being. So relaxation, you get our permission to watch Netflix if you want, although that's not the best way to replenish. Detachment, getting away from devices, getting out in nature, or spending time with friends. Planning for the week actually is a very good strategy for creating less stress. When you have your schedule set and you know what you're supposed to do, it keeps your wheels from spinning as you're going to sleep, trying to figure out what else you have to do and what you have to get done the next day. And the last is mastery. Picking up a hobby or returning to a hobby that you have left in the long past as you've grown into adulthood that you really care about and that you want to achieve in. Mastery is actually the best way to replenish your energy. And sometimes you can combine these activities. So let's say you're an avid rock climber and you love to get good at rock climbing. Rock climbing also requires you to detach from devices, and you do it with a friend, right? So you're also finding this relaxing. There are multiple things that you can hit with one activity, but the idea is that you can also, if worse comes to worse, take some control over your free time.
And with that, I'm going to stop sharing our screen and open it up to discussion.
Oh my gosh, first, can we give a little love to Patricia and Katina for like sharing? Thank you so much.
Thank you.
you. Yeah, open questions squad. And I'll also say like I was thinking about what you're talking about, like when someone can take a break and then they're like, oh, someone's got my back. There's culture amp research around like teams that actually utilize their bench effectively and like more people are actually getting onto the field, specifically with some of our NFL customers. Those are the teams that are actually more successful. So it's like so fascinating that like
Yeah.
we like always need to be on and all this stuff.
Yeah.
We always have to be on the field. And if I can't do it, no one else can. But actually, if creating an environment where other people are able to step in and take over, it actually leads to higher performing teams. Anyway.
100%. Everyone needs breaks. And one of the things that we find most fascinating just in talking this concept or these concepts through with leaders, as we've been kind of delivering the book content, people often complain about stuff that they perpetuate. And, you don't always have to, hate the player. We hate the game, right? But it's like the idea is like, they're like, oh, I hate when people are interrupting my vacation and I can't even get anything done. I can't even spend time with my family because I'm constantly getting pinged. And then you're like, well, are you pinging your team members when they're on vacation? Like, well, yeah. It's like, okay, well, then you're not helping yourself because then they also feel like they can interrupt you. And it's this never ending cycle, right? So you can create these micro cultures where even though you might be getting pushed from a particular layer in your organization and maybe you don't have a lot of control over that, you can create the extent to which you do it to other people, which also cuts down on the extent to which they'll do it to you. So that at least cuts down those pieces of communication that you might be getting.
Love that.
I was just responding to Sophie in the chat, but I'll just say it out loud. So Sophie, you just asked how you can share some of the leaders at your organization without necessarily reading the book. So I would recommend follow us on LinkedIn, and we've shared, like, go back through our old posts. We've shared tons of podcasts we've been on, media articles about the content in the book itself, that could be a great way for people to kind of start to see the content or listen to, an hour-long podcast or 45-minute podcast, to get them exposed to these ideas. And then obviously more depth is in the book.
And our podcast season is going to be shaped around the book as well. So if you also want to, as our podcast episodes come out, you can also share those and they can get some flavor for what's in there.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Oh, wait, Jesse, I think you're muted.
Thank you. We had this conversation the other day about like severance and the themes of the show, and TJ was there too. And we were talking about how like ultimately it comes back to us doing inner work to be able to set boundaries effectively. And I'm glad that you like that is like a huge part of this too, which is like, but you also have to have a leader that's going to honor the boundary. Like so it's one thing to do the work, have the like courage to set the boundary, and then the leader has to be able to honor it, respect it, and like hold to it. And so I'm glad that you mentioned that because it's anyway, I brought this up because of the severance thing, which is like we were talking about how individuals need to be doing their own work around self-worth and value, and I don't always need to be on, and I have other things outside of my work life that I care about.
Yeah, and I think that self-reflection on what your boundaries look like is so critical. And as I mentioned earlier, it's going to change, and that's okay. And like figuring out why it changes and what you want now, is also important. So you keep that communication going. Because if let's say you set a boundary that you want to go to the gym at like noon, and then suddenly your favorite instructor is doing a 4 o'clock class. Well, your boundary changes, right? Because that's important to you. So whatever that looks like for you, kind of, I think it's important just to make sure that you're checking in that the boundaries still make sense.
I have a kind of question leading off of that. Like for the folks who have kind of made their work their value and they are workaholics and you want to get people off the bench, or you at the very least want to put them on the bench sometimes to just like rest and hold those boundaries. How do you do that in such a way that it's like seen as a way of supporting instead of like an attack and a like shutdown of like, hey, stop doing this thing that you love to do, even though it's like draining them.
I think you can explain it that way. Like we talked about that these generator leaders are great communicators about their intentions and why they're doing things, right? And so the way that you just explained that, you'll be contributing more and performing better, helping the team to perform better. And I will consider you a better performer if you do these things that will help us to rotate the bench. And the reason for that is because I'm seeing you as a leader. I'm seeing you as a person who has a lot of leadership capability, but great leaders unlock other people's potential. And so we already know you're really good at this, but now I need to see if you can help support other people unlocking their potential. So sometimes if you frame it in a way where you're helping them to recognize that, that can be helpful. But you also might have an honest conversation with them if you feel comfortable about, why they're feeling the need to always be on and what they're missing outside of that. And if there's a past version of themselves that they might reconnect with that might have had more balance, and figuring out what it is that they do like to do and what things have gone by the wayside and what they might pick up to fill that space. So I think honest conversations about the why, and then also what's motivating for them about engaging differently.
And
So
it's
Patricia, you say something.
Yeah, I was gonna just say it's funny because I agree with everything you said, Katina, but I actually just had a colleague ask me the same question. Like they have a very hyper workaholic on their team, and they were saying that like they constantly are pinging them late, right? And doing all this stuff. And I asked the person, I was like, are you responding? Like when they're pinging you that late? And they always did. So I was like, well, then now they don't think that your boundaries matter either, right? So maybe this is something that's really important to them. And there are people at different phases in their life where work is everything and that's how they feel and that's what they want. That's fine. That's their decision ultimately. But if you aren't keeping your own boundaries when that person is working like that and they have questions for you, then they're going to keep thinking that that behavior is okay. And that And then that won't let them disconnect because now they're seeing that you're still responding well, then maybe I need to keep doing it. If you really clearly state like, after 7, like I'm not available and actually not be available, because they don't need to be working either, then the person may start to back off and may actually start to do that behavior themselves too, because they're no longer feeling like they're going to actually get things done because they maybe not be getting what they need from you as a leader or from other team members because they're not working, right? So if no one around them is working, it might encourage them to, like that role modeling might encourage them to also back off a bit. But then the other thing, like as Katina mentioned, I do think the conversation and even just the concern for burnout, like talking about if you've had an experience where you burnt out before, I think that can help make a connection, right? Like, yeah, I think a lot of us have been
Mhm.
there. So like explaining like, I really loved my job, but then at one point I just couldn't do it anymore. And he's like, I don't want you to get to that point. I want you to thrive and continue to see that that value that you're getting out of this work and feel that connection. And I think that over time, when you don't get enough rest, you don't get enough space from work, it's actually it's going to make this job harder for you in a way that you're not going to be appreciating, right? Like this matters to you. Let's make sure it continues to matter to you so that you can take that time between so that you're not getting to burnout.
Awesome. Thank you.
I don't want to like keep, oh, sorry, Sarah, but
No,
mine
go
sort of,
ahead.
I have a similar but slightly different on the same theme. I'm from Orangewood Foundation. We're a nonprofit, and the majority of our staff is direct care staff who work with youth who are often traumatized. And we just had a conversation yesterday in a big team meeting about like, we're in an area where there are a lot of unhoused people, there are a lot of people, and like our staff wants to run out into the street to help people who aren't our clients, and working on how to like, and so it's like it's, is there a step beyond like, and when you tell them not to work, they're like, but then no one's helping this person. And so
Yeah.
we're really working on a message of how to balance that, and
Yeah.
if there's something like a step above, like, you can't pour from an empty cup or whatever the expression is.
Yeah, I mean, I've actually, well, first I've worked and volunteered in several contexts that are similar to what you're describing, specifically in the trafficking space, so and gender-based violence space in shelters and also recovery programs, and I have done some research in that area as well. And there's a big literature on vicarious trauma, which you're probably aware of, that you can really experience. While often people who are experiencing vicarious trauma, the way of processing that can be to feel that the only way that you can deal with that is to give back. So it's this I'm feeling overwhelmed by other people's emotions, and so I feel that I can release that by giving back to other people, or the way I see as releasing that feeling that I have is by helping people, and that will make me feel like it'll go away. But actually, that creates a vicarious trauma cycle, which their jobs are there are always going to be more people who need help than they can help as an individual or that your organization can help, but there's only one them. And so they're already doing such incredible work helping the people that they can help on a daily basis, but if they want to have a long career and be able to help people sustainably over time, then they also have to
Mm-hmm.
make sure that they're processing um the emotions that they're feeling, that they're taking time to actually sit with the experiences that they've had. I know in many instances in the organizations that I've worked with, and I actually wrote a paper about this, even just volunteering and doing research in this space, that you're going and going and going, and you're never processing what's happening. And often when people slow down in these environments and start to process, they realize that there's a groundswell of emotions that they've been suppressing, that they haven't been working through, and that have been coming out in other maybe unhealthy ways. And overwork is one of those ways. And that becomes a problem over time, whether you want it to or not. So if it's
Mhm.
not right now getting in their way of doing their job, over time, it likely will. And so sometimes recognizing that you're going through and naming that you're going through vicarious trauma, and then saying like, you need time to process and sit with this very emotional job. As they start to do that, they might recognize the value in that, and also some of what they're not engaging with internally because they're so focused on giving externally, which is wonderful and rewarded and needed, but it's also not a long-term game plan. So you probably know all this, but burnout and turnover is so high in these roles,
Mhm.
and that's part of why. So if you don't want to be the person that burns out or the person that turns over, you got to start taking care of it now instead of waiting till you get to the point where you're already breaking.
Yeah. And the added benefit of like take a day off and the place doesn't, burn to the ground while you're gone.
Yes.
You can do that. So yeah.
Yes.
Thank you for
Absolutely.
your insight on that. I really appreciate it.
I like just kind of double click on that. And then, sorry, I know Sarah wanted to share too, which is just, I think sometimes we lose clarity on like what our actual goals are, or we don't have good goals in the first place. Like we don't
Mm-hmm.
have good measurements in the first place. And so then therefore you're like, oh, I'm doing all this stuff. And like I feel like for me, like that we have a massive global community. There's so many things that I could do. There's so many things that I could measure. And I've had to get like super clear on like this is the stuff, these are the three things that I'm doing. If it doesn't fit in this bucket, then like I need to be really cautious about whether this is an effective use of my
Mm-hmm.
time, and like ruthless about that. And it sucks like like getting into that. But I feel like as a result of that, I have so much more clarity about like that's important, that's not important. Like everything else is just like not gonna be great as a result, which is just like the reality of a solo person running a massive
Mm-hmm.
operation, and really being accountable with your time, I think. But otherwise, I'd be miserable, just like doing a million things and being like, I'm providing value. Like, so I think it's helpful. I think it's helpful to have the right goals and the right metrics. Otherwise, everything's urgent and important, and you're just making yourself miserable.
Focus
Yeah.
on the middle view. Yeah.
Okay, I'm sorry, Sarah, you wanted to say something too.
I guess my kind of question was about more like, I guess, managing up. So if there's that your boss or your leader is the one that's like pinging you late at night and clearly there's no boundaries, I guess, do you have any tips around managing that? I think it's a little
Um,
easier to have a coworker conversation versus a conversation with your boss.
yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of dependencies here. So if you don't
Yeah.
have a strong relationship with that boss, that makes it obviously harder. If you have the ability to have those conversations and like really hash it out, it can be a little bit easier. I'm gonna go in the extreme direction. This person does not want to hear it at all. Um, when that I've been there. I have been there. I've been in a situation where the organization was horrible and there was just no boundaries just didn't exist. And it was difficult because I was a leader at the time, so I made a microculture for my team, trying to bounce away any of those boundary breakers from them, but I didn't have anyone doing it for me. Which is where recovery was really important because otherwise I did end up burning out in that job. But when you have a leader like that, what I would recommend is starting small and testing when you can actually ignore their ping. Um, so they ping you, let's say every night. Let's say one night you just don't respond. Or you say something like, I can't get to this right now, but I'll respond in the morning. So first maybe try that. And then the next time just don't say anything. And in the morning say, sorry about that. I'm here, now. Um, Start with like a little bit. Don't obviously if this doesn't care about this kind of stuff, they're not going to respond right away to you just suddenly fully ignoring them. But if you can start to take little steps, little steps, little steps, and if they don't have like complete meltdowns around that, then you'll, potentially could build yourself up to a place where you have more reasonable boundaries. And then as you do, keeping track, as Jesse mentioned with the goals, keeping track of how you're doing, your progress, showing your productivity. Anytime you're able to show metrics around what you're doing can be very, very valuable, right? Because if they don't see you're there, some people falsely think that if you're not around, you're not getting stuff done, right? But if you're able to constantly give updates saying like, oh, I just accomplished this week or this or that, then they might start to back off too, because there may be more of like an understanding that, okay, like they don't have to be here all the time to actually be productive. So I think starting small and showing metrics and keeping them apprised of what's going on can be really helpful. The other thing is, again, I'm going to like slightly better scenario, but if you had a leader that most leaders don't want to be doing these kinds of things and making you burn out, right? So like I'm gonna hope that this person isn't that. Um, if you put down numbers of your hours and how long things take you and how much you're spending on basically these stupid pings, because my guess is the pings are not actually urgent. It's like, here are the goals that we have for the year. Here's how much time I'm spending on that. Here's the like 30 hours I'm spending on random tasks that you're throwing my way. Can we focus in on what are the actual vital things that I need to be focusing on? When they see that data and those numbers and hours, that actually might jumpstart them a little bit. Like, oh, wait, like I didn't realize that me pinging you every night is adding all this extra time, and that could be a problem, right? So if there is some potential positive intention behind the person, you might think about really tracking your time in a way that can help them see how they're derailing you with what their random asks.
I love that. Yeah, no, that's really great. I mean, I guess that also hinges on like, I guess going back to Jesse's point, making sure there's super clear goals on like what is supposed to be accomplished too. So, but that's great. Thanks.
I shared in the chat too. I love people that ask me, when does that need to be done by? I'm like, oh, I wish I was better at that. Like, I wish I was better at when someone said, hey, can I have this thing? I like immediately am like, oh, I need to get it read right now, you know? Like, I feel like the people who are starting to ask me that, it's training me to get better at it. But I feel like that could help too. Instead of just someone being like, I need this thing, and they ping you at 8 p.m. It's like, cool, when do you need to buy? Like, right now?
So I was gonna say, I would just add on top of that, when do you need it by, and is what can I push to make room for it? You get
Ooh.
that, it's like, okay, like you also said you needed X by Friday. Could that wait till Monday? Make them decide the priority.
I love that. Okay, that kind of transitions into what I was gonna say about we were talking about like how comfortable you feel with a leader and things like that. Um, as sharing some fun culture amp research recently that just came out. We have a new report called The Science of High Performance. And it basically says that employees who report to high performing leaders are 4.5 times more likely to be high performing, and that often we have this misconception that that being a high performer is a characteristic trait, but really there's a different differentiator for someone who is a high performer. Can you all guess what it is by chance? We've been kind of like hinting at it, what Sarah was asking and how she responded. Anyone?
They have good boundaries.
Oh, okay. It's like you're getting warmer. It's so employees who sustain high performance feel more psychologically safe at work. Which is like, to your point, I mean, like they feel comfortable even having that conversation with their boss and being like, oh, okay, I could take a risk. They're going to respect my boundaries, those kinds of things. But I thought that this was like relevant for the conversation because do you even feel comfortable sharing that boundary with your boss? Like is a level of psychological safety that leads to our ability to perform at our best, even at work, which I just love this. So anyway.
Yeah. And it goes back to the idea of it's not the time, it's the tone, right? Like people, I bet if you asked what's the differentiator, most people would say they work the longest hours. They put in the most time, right? Like that's what people would, I think was the differentiator. Like they're working the longest and the hardest. And really, it's not that. It's the team environment that they're in that's unlocking their potential to work better not just to put in the most time. And so that's really interesting because a psychologically safe team environment is a tone, right, that you can set, or part of a tone you can set on a team. And we have some stuff on psychological safety in our book too.
And like we can have direct impact on that.
Yep.
Yeah, and we
Yeah.
know, I mean, kind of going back to like workplace wellness broadly, like that is so tied to high performance too, right? Because of those same reasons. Like you can't be doing well in your environment if you don't have psychological safety, if you don't have capacity to disconnect and take care of yourself. Like all of those things really ultimately impact whether or not you can do well. When you are doing well as a human, you're going to be able to perform better at work and, you know, and in your personal life and everywhere, right? Like thriving kind of spills over to everything. So if we're able to make sure our employees are feeling their best, the safest, and all of that, it makes it a lot easier.
Can I jump in from Wisconsin?
Yeah.
I finally got a chance to pull over so I can take this all in and maybe share something. This is more of a comment. First of all, you've sold a couple of books, so that's good. You're doing your job.
Yay. Great.
Second of all, as I've been listening to this, I've sort of brought forward my Jerry Maguire moment, which I need to do and I will do in my organization because, and before I get to that, I think to get good wellness, you have to have the table stakes of so much of the other organizational dynamics that, you know, the pay, you know, the clear roles, responsibilities, the healthy culture, as we were just talking about psychological safety. So I think that's just table stakes. But my comment was going to be, I've worked in an organization where, you know, there was the frosting of wellness and wellness programs, but beneath that was sort of a, you know, dirty secret climate. And I'm in a situation right now where I'm, you know, again, we're in Vegas, right? We've turned over our head of HR, national or North American HR, 3 times in 3 years, and it's actually even worse than that. And at XX age, and with, you know, decades of experience under my belt, I just cannot sit idly by. And I think that's where wellness has to turn into, you know, some pretty discrete actions and to be vulnerable so that we can buy the goodness for the next generation. Because I really feel like some of these wellness decisions or lack of decisions can pollute the generation that's in the organization now and even like the next generation. So, and I know that kind of is in line with the principles that you started out with. So I think it's really incumbent upon us to take that mantle and run with it.
Yeah, we completely agree. And one of the things that we talk about in the book is one of the main reasons that we got into doing this area of psychology and studying wellness and writing the book is because to take it even one level further and in conversations with senior leaders that we've had and some trainings and workshops that we've done in the past, asking people not just what they want their legacy to be for themselves and the people who directly report to them, but also for the people who directly report to those people and those people's families. And, you know, what if we locked all the people who ever reported to you and their families in a room and said, what was the impact that this person had on you and your lives? What would they say? Would you want to be there for that conversation? And then even thinking further from that, like societally, you know, what are the impacts that companies have on communities? Like, are you revitalizing the communities that you have your employees in so that people are able to give back to their communities and have energies to, you know, build strong relationships and friendships and families? Or are you sucking energy out of that community? If you're sucking energy out of the community, then you're depleting your ability to recruit new generations of people who have more energy because you're not giving out what you want to take back in, right? And so there's really a big kind of ripple effect that goes on. And for people, for leaders who care about that, which is despite, I think, what people tell everyone that leaders only care about money and they don't care about anything else, that has been a resonant message with many leaders to think about their broader legacy and impact more so than we were told initially it might. So yeah.
Yeah, and I also like what you mentioned about generations too. Like ultimately everyone wants to feel healthy and full and whole, right? But the norms have changed over time. And then back to the legacy piece, if you are now setting the tone of your team and those millennials obviously been there for a little bit, but the Gen Z coming in, helping them understand like how they can be high performers while still maintaining the wellness that they seek can be really valuable and leave that longer term legacy, right? Because they're coming in, they're learning how to be leaders from you, and then they're going to be those leaders for the next generation. So I think that there is something really valuable about thinking about your legacy that way. And when it comes to generations, like the expectations and the table stakes have changed a bit because people are talking about these things more than they were in the past. So now if you're able to be that organization that can really take care of those Gen Z folks and help guide them to what they need to become to be effective and productive, you're not going to be that statistic where you're firing all your Gen Z, right? There's a lot of data around that right now. That's not great. But how can you build a sustainable organization if you don't use Gen Z employees, right? You have to figure out how to work with them. And one of the pieces is having these leaders that can have really good, trusted relationships with their employees to build that environment that's going to be helping them thrive and then show them how to, you know, what the performance expectations and how that all looks too, right? There's kind of like two pieces that are going on right now.
You had one more question in the chat about from Amanda. If we have a moment, and then we can start to wind down.
One question.
Yeah, I put a quick answer to it, but we could give more detail on that. So about whether or not companies that offer well-being programs should pivot. So like we mentioned at the beginning, we don't think that your workplace wellness programs can't work hand in hand with creating a positive work environment. If you have a positive work environment and you have these programs, it's not a bad thing. But if you're hearing people saying that they're stressed and overworked and burnout by the day-to-day work, and then you're offering these programs and initiatives, that's not meshing the solution with the root of the problem. So if what you're hearing is the root is the day-to-day, the stressfulness of being in the work environment, we would suggest that investing money in fixing that problem, which is creating a better work environment through leaders, would be more beneficial than trying to invest more in programs that we see as band-aid solutions for what the root problems are that you're experiencing.
Yeah, I would definitely take a look at the programs. Like if no one's using them or very few people are using them, that's probably a sign that they don't have the capacity to do that, or maybe it's just not a good fit for that team, right? So when it comes to pivoting, taking away things can obviously be bad from a perception perspective. People might feel like, oh my gosh, you're taking this thing away. But if like 5 people are using it, let's say you have like a Headspace memberships and like 5 people are actively using it. Does it actually make sense for you to pay for that? Or do you start to share that statistic and say, instead of this, we're going to be investing in X and talk about what you're investing in? And if that's your leaders, talk about that. Talk about those problems that, you know, maybe are the root cause. Be open. And if an organization does this well and they're open, like saying, hey, we're seeing burnouts pretty high. We think we need to focus on prioritization and really helping our leaders focus on the vital few and not doing extra work that's unnecessary. We're going to, instead of doing this Headspace app, we're going to be training our leaders around this. I think a lot of people are going to feel good about that, right? So the communication, the transparency is also really important.
Hopefully that helps, Amanda.
Yeah, it does. And it's something that we've been talking about already, you know, as far as like creating some extra like training for the leaders, for HR managers, for managers in general. So this book kind of came out at a good time for me and the company that I work for, as far as the conversations that we've already been having. So yeah, it was great to hear about the book from you two and to be able to kind of ask you that question and see what you thought.
Awesome. Yeah. I think at the best, you know, Thomas mentioned this like icing, right? And sometimes we've used this cake analogy before too. Like you're icing this cake and the cake the cake sucks and you got to rebake it, right? Like, and so you can keep putting icing on it forever and ever and paying for that icing, or you can be like, let's get a new cake. And so I think at the best, wellness programs and initiatives are icing on a very good cake that make the cake even better, right? At the worst, when the cake is bad and you're like tricking people with the icing, now they're kind of like an insult. We kick our book off with a story about a woman who was made to go to a 4-hour resilience training to try to build her resilience to combat stressful work cultures. And she was so overworked that she had to do it in her spare time and give up a life activity that she wanted to do the training. And it just felt like this wellness offering was so not what she wanted and counter to what was supposed to be happening. And so at worst, I think these things can feel insulting when you're in an environment where it's so not what people need. So kind of calibrating like where you think you're at and thinking about what's best for your employees and your budget is always the best thing to do.
All right. This has been amazing. Anyone want to share like a closing reflection, either like a one word or a one sentence of just like any takeaways that how you're feeling towards the end of this session? TJ, you came off mute. I'm gonna start with you.
Good. Yeah, I was just gonna say like just the simple framework of the generator and extinguisher, and like whether or not I share that with people, but like have it in my mind of like, hey, this is a helpful thing, this is not a helpful thing. Um, I think like and having that is going to be super helpful for me. So thank you for that.
Awesome. We're so glad. Yay. Thank you.
Sarah, you're next on my Brady Bunch square. Would you be willing to go? You can also pass. That's fine too.
Sure. I mean, I was gonna say one word was I'm just feeling invigorated. It's just great to be surrounded with such like passion about this and to know that there's people doing this work and are passionate about it. So I guess that's one feeling that I'm having.
Amanda?
We feel the same.
Yeah, I feel that the book and this discussion were both very insightful. Having worked for companies that were both, you know, like generator rich companies and extinguisher rich companies at separate times in my life, I feel that I know pretty firsthand what it's like to be working for these types of individuals that you've described in the book. So now I'm in a role where I'm trying to help people become, you know, better leaders and offer better workplaces. And so it's just great to know that there is that you too, I'm sure there's more people out there working on this type of research so that there's actually statistics, the numbers to show that the impact that this type of work has, and like actually, you know, leading in this way, it does like help the company as well as and in addition to helping the individual. So thank you.
Love
Thank
that.
you.
Thomas, would you be willing to share? You can also pass. You pass? Cool. Anyone cameras off want to share? Meredith, Janelle, Lou Mary admin.
I can share. I'm really glad I hopped into this at this time. We're working on a leadership development program within my company, and we're sort of deep into it already. But I really like this twist of being able to say like, we could spend more money on wellness, but really the wellness comes from you guys, the leaders, and then being able to take this idea to my chief people and culture officer, and we don't have to spend any extra money on wellness. We could just roll it into the things we're already doing with developing our leaders. So that's always fun. I got
Yeah,
an idea
that's
and it's
awesome.
free.
Yay, that's awesome.
Save money is always good.
Yes.
Awesome. All right, can we give one last like some love to Patricia and Katina? Thank you both so much for being here. Appreciate your time, your wisdom, the work you're doing. More of this for the world, please.
Yay, thank you.
Great time with all of you. Thank you so much for chatting with us.
So awesome. Well, thanks, squad, for being here. We'll send the recording out after, and whatever resources that Patricia and Katina want to share as well. And then I'll also link to the Culture Amp report on the science of high performance in the follow-up email too, in case that's if anyone wants to nerd out on that. So uh can we do a culture first clap out? This is a very community oriented thing. So Patricia, will you count us out? What's gonna happen? She's gonna go 1, 2, 3. We're all gonna clap, and then this Zoom meeting will just like shut off, and that's it. So
That's fun.
cool. Come off mute if you're able to. Thank you all for being here. Cheers to co-creating a better world of work. Patricia, count us to 3.
1, 2, 3.